Okay.
You're on mute, Shay.
Will we still have quorum if Jim leaves the call?
Well, technically, yes. Because I think once you finalize your roster, it will get finalized on October 5th. So technically right now, I think that, no, Maggie, you were ex officio before, weren't you?
Correct.
Then I don't think you'll have quorum when Jim
Hold on, let me
leaves.
pull up the.
All right, well, maybe
That's
I'll
okay.
just put you guys on mute and stay on the call. That's what we need to do.
I mean, we could also potentially punt some of these things and try to keep things fairly short for some of this discussion if we have you until 5:15.
Okay.
All right, yeah, let's maybe just try to keep it short this session since we have people missing anyways. Maybe just focus on definitely making sure we have our members figured out. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and start. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development. The Affordable Housing Subcommittee of the Commission on Equitable Housing and Development has now commenced. It is August 10th at 4:06 p.m. This meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and protect the public health. As we continue our efforts in meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number, to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, in order to comply with open state meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by the chat function. Okay, so here's who I have for voting members. Myself, Sheree Jimenez present, Maggie Maroteas,
Present.
Marianne Bierling, not on the call, Jim Toffel,
Present.
and Olga Flores. So yeah, technically then if Jim left the call, we would not.
Yeah, and Shay, just one clarification. That is how Sarah and I are interpreting what we anticipate people would want to see moving forward. So that's item 4 and that list are related. So, you know, trying to finalize today, that's what our understanding is the intent of the subcommittee is moving forward. So
Okay.
Today, I think the only people that are voting members that are on are you and Jim.
And Maggie.
For the
Maggie.
future, after October 5th.
Oh, wait, so why would Maggie not be voting anymore?
Because she has not been a voting member to date of this subcommittee. Once you formalize, you'll be good moving forward.
Okay. Okay, so sorry, I'm a little bit confused. And let me finish the roll call and then I'm
Yeah.
wondering if we should bump up that item first.
I do have a guest here that I want to
Okay, all right,
at least get to soon.
Okay, so ex officio, we have Betty Villegas, not here, not present. Marcos Ismael is also missing. He said that he was not gonna make it. Corin Manning.
Present.
And then we have our regular attendees, David Wall, who said he was also gonna be missing. Jason Heisey,
I'm here.
Sally Schwinn, Megan Headings,
I'm here.
thank you, and Joe Adino.
I'm here. Hi.
Hi, okay, so let's move on to the call to the audience. This is the time when any member of the public may address the Affordable Housing Subcommittee. Due to time constraints, the total time allocated for this is 15 minutes. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes each. Due to open meeting law, commission members cannot discuss topics that are not on the agenda. Items brought up by the public may be considered as an agenda item for a future meeting. Is there anyone here who'd like to speak? Okay, well, hearing none, I'm just gonna kind of try to breeze through this. We'll move on to item number 3, which is zoning. So this will be, Anne, you'll take this over. And we have Tyler Bump from Eco Northwest. Thank you.
Yes, I am happy to do an intro, and I would also invite Corin to jump in here. So I'll just mention that based on the conversations you all have been having regarding zoning and barriers in the code to affordable housing development, and then at the full commission meeting where the Housing First Subcommittee brought this also as an item, and the whole discussion on creating a task force, not creating a task force. I feel like this conversation has been circling without a whole lot of clarity as to what are the goals, what could come out of it. And similarly, we've been working with Tyler from Eco Northwest, and I'll have him introduce himself in a second. I think some of you do know him, where others I'm not sure if you do. And so Tyler works for a agency that does a lot of work around different spaces. He'll explain this more, but I thought it would be helpful. We are potentially looking at working with Tyler on sort of a zoning examination. And so thought that but I don't want to go down that path without making sure that is a scope that will meet the needs of the subcommittee too. And so before we have kind of unreleased Tyler to go down that, I wanted to get him here and talk about some of the work he's done and seen in other communities and let him sort of give a little more context. So that was my hope today, is not necessarily finalize anything, but at least have Tyler give a little more context into what he's done and what he's seen in some other communities.
Thanks, Anne. Hi, everybody. Anne, how much time do I have to chat with the group today?
I would say, I don't know, Shay, that's.
Well, if we're trying to speed things up, I don't know. I'd like to give us enough time, but at least, I don't know, 20 to 20-ish minutes.
That's great. I think what I'd like to do is use 10 maybe to chat through sort of my rough scope of some things, ideas that I put together, and then open it up for a little bit of discussion around priority, some of the conversations that you all have had. Before I do that, my name's Tyler Bump. I'm a project director at a consulting firm called Eco Northwest. My work really focuses on policies, zoning and development standards, and how to get those to work better for, frankly, affordable housing and housing production in different sorts of ways. I've been in this role back in consulting for about 3 years now. Prior to this, I was city staff at the city of Portland, where I led a lot of what frankly is sort of referred to as best practices sometimes in some of the space. I led the city and the state of Oregon's first inclusionary zoning code project after the preemption on inclusionary zoning was lifted by the state. I've helped out on developing city and statewide middle housing codes, which is really targeted and focused towards lower barrier, attainable, more affordable ownership housing in many cases. And worked on lots of different projects all over the place. I've really loved working with folks at HCD and planning and the Department of Transportation and Mobility and a few different things in Tucson over the last couple of years. And one of the reasons that I really like working in Tucson, that I'm interested in working in Tucson, is that I pay attention to a lot of the sort of indicators about where housing markets are going across different cities. And I saw things sort of converging in Tucson a couple of years ago. And I had kind of an oh no moment where I was looking at like, oh, what are opportunities to help out in different ways? So that's one of the things I want to talk to you about today. I put together a sort of draft scope of work that I'll walk through that's looking at two major phases. The first phase is really focusing in on thinking and looking at shelter housing, transitional housing, and supportive housing, and what some of the zoning code or regulatory barriers might be to allowing that and having housing providers and service providers better able to build that kind of housing and supportive services that support communities and folks who need those services and types of housing. In the Unified Development Code, there are some big lifts and small lifts, frankly, that could be undertaken to help support housing, supportive housing, transitional housing, and supportive services, housing and supportive services in different ways. Without getting too far into the weeds on zoning and development standards, there's some small things around definitional issues around how do you define what certain housing is, how do you define a household, how do you define a tenant, how do you define a housing type. And so what we're looking at for this first phase of work is to, number one, do a scan of what's going on and have some conversations with stakeholders, affordable housing providers, staff from planning and HCD, and then doing a review of the zoning code to see where those barriers might be. The second sort of task that we're looking at in this phase is doing a best practices review of what have other cities done to tackle some of these similar issues, and what are the policy conditions that have allowed folks to do that in different cities. It's really hard to make these changes happen, and a lot of the changes have happened over the last couple of years when cities have adopted housing emergencies, for example. So knowing the policy and the political context for how these changes have happened is also really important to understand how to make some of these best practices occur. Our last task that we're looking at is sort of outlining a strategy. It's not an implementation framework. It's not doing straight through code changes for the Unified Development Code. It's really bringing some of the barriers that we identified in task one, aligning those with the best practices and identifying opportunities for city staff to take some action on some of those strategies. So that's the first phase that we're looking at, again, really focused on that sort of what we call the housing continuum, really focused in on transitional housing, supportive services housing, and shelter housing. Before I move on to the next phase, and I'd kind of like to open it up for questions and conversation on that one.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering why we're not looking at affordable housing more broadly, and not,
And-
you know.
And Shay, yeah, so one thing, Tyler, for some context, I would say for that first phase work, we'll probably have you working more with social service providers and folks who are providing more of the transitional housing, where we're getting to your answer, Shay, with this next phase question.
Okay, great.
Maybe, Shay, and I guess, would it make sense for me to go through that phase two so we can talk about all the questions?
I think so, because
Yeah.
I think that's where this group is a little more focused.
Okay, cool. Well, similar to what I described on that sort of continuum of housing, there's been a lot of recommendations from recent projects. So just in the list that I came up with real quickly, we've got the HAST, Thrive in the 05, Sunshine Mile Overlay, some work on the Norte Sur ETOD project, and some other broader projects that are happening that have some preliminary recommendations around affordable housing at different income levels, different tenures. And so one of the things that we want to do is really gather all that information and say what's out there, what's been implemented, where are there overlapping recommendations across some of those projects, and where's there already been community support for some of these recommendations. In that task, we'd also really like to have a workshop with city staff and some of the core stakeholders and service providers, affordable housing developers, to understand a little bit better about how these policies, regulations, and program changes could better remove barriers to affordable housing and housing production more broadly too. So like a little bit of understanding how you got there, what you would have liked to see since some of those recommendations were happened, why they didn't happen, and a little more context around that. The next task that we have is a similar sort of best practices and case study. And this, as I've been thinking through it, can be pretty big. I'm having a hard time staying focused, really, because there's a lot out there. But there's sort of two categories of things that I was thinking about. One is what are the zoning and regulatory barriers to affordable housing? And frankly, there's quite a bit in Tucson. There's very nuanced things around setback requirements, for example, the lot coverage things that are in the standards. There's things around density. There's things around different things that are sometimes really big barriers, even bigger barriers for affordable housing developers than for market rate developers, just because of the funding and financing of how affordable housing happens, as you all know. So really looking at some of those sort of details and best practices about how other cities have approached removing barriers to affordable housing from a zoning and code standpoint. And then on the other side of that column that I mentioned is how have cities provided incentives for affordable housing, either regulatory incentives or financial incentives, or oftentimes those are paired together for mixed income housing. And so some of those conversations have recently, sorry, my calendar just went crazy, have recently happened with the Sunshine Mile Overlay District conversation. But what are other cities doing, and what are the challenges that they faced, and what are the outcomes that they've seen as part of those work in the sort of best practices space there? An emerging piece of work that's happening in other cities right now is what we're calling a deeper affordability bonus or a deeper affordability incentive. So a lot of cities are starting to, frankly, provide a little bit of a leg up to affordable housing developers and affordable housing providers specifically, and allowing them to go further, knowing that the housing that's built is going to be, in most cases, permanent or long-term rent restricted or have affordability restrictions associated with them. And to provide an opportunity for affordable housing developers and affordable housing providers to be more competitive in site acquisition with private sector developers. So another part of this is, where have cities gone further to even encourage and incent and support from a zoning code and a regulatory standpoint, affordable housing providers specifically. The next part of this that I have, I was calling a strategy, but honestly, I think it might be more of a framework, because I think this is a beginning of a conversation for what are the things, where are the barriers, the zoning code barriers, what are the best practices in other places, again, looking at those together, and what's the framework to move forward, and what is a nearer term implementation steps that folks in the community, folks on this committee and city staff think makes sense to continue to move forward in a near term way. The affordable housing piece can be focused in different ways. So a lot of other cities' best practices sometimes are focused on what are called sort of areas of change or targeted density corridors or transit corridors. But there's a lot of sort of policy changes happening recently across the country around removing exclusionary policies and exclusionary regulations too. So there's areas of high opportunity that aren't transit corridors, that aren't targeted for high density development. What do some of those other areas of high opportunity look like in terms of providing opportunities for affordable housing? And so with that, I do want to make sure we've got time for discussion. I see Jim's hand up, but Shay, I'll defer to you on how you'd like me to answer questions here.
Yeah, go ahead. I take over. You can, I don't mind. Yeah.
So thank you, Tyler. First of all, appreciate you being here today and taking an interest in Tucson. I guess I've got a couple of thoughts when it comes to zoning. You know, I see it really as there's two things that I think need to get addressed. So there's, you know, what you talked about is giving bonuses for affordability, you know, things like setback, parking requirements, density bonuses, building height restrictions, things like that are, I think, are relatively straightforward. The second portion, though, I think that is significant is the rezoning. You know, where a site is zoned for commercial or it's got industrial or some other type of zoning, and in order to do a residential use, it has to go through a rezoning. That process is very expensive and very cumbersome. So there's the state of Arizona has this housing supply study, and they were in Tucson last week. And it was an interesting session. A lot of people talked. My takeaway from that session is that the state is looking to put in levers or something to give the cities less power on zoning codes. They're looking to take some of that away from the cities. So, but I'm not sure, you know, when with the timing of that or how that's going to happen. But I think this is a good discussion. What I'm not clear on, I guess my question for you is are you currently engaged with the city of Tucson on this, or is this something that you want to be engaged on and do the workshop, the core workshop you're talking about, or what? You know, you said you take an interest in Tucson, but how are you actually working here, or are you working here, or is this the start of it?
I've been working in Tucson on different projects for the last couple of years. We've been having a lot of conversations with folks. It's been wild during COVID and ARPA funding to help HCD out on sort of LIHTC applications and site acquisition criteria and all those fun things that we've been helping Ann and her team and Corin and planning on other projects. So we're pretty deep into current projects, frankly, in Tucson right now. We have an on-call contract with HCD. And so one of the things, and I don't know if you want to jump in and talk about the process here, but you know, one of the things that we're doing is sort of developing a scope of work and want to respond to what this committee thinks are the key issues around these zoning barriers and how to look at opportunities to remove those barriers to support affordable housing and housing production more broadly. So, and I don't know, do you want to talk about the process a little bit?
I just, one thing I'll mention there. So Jim, answer is yes, Tyler's been working with us and has been working closely with DTM and PDSD on the Equitable TOD project. And one thing I appreciate about Tyler is kind of tying all these disparate things together. And so the one piece I did want to mention that I've heard from this commission is, well, thinking about the barriers, also thinking about what has led to the inequitable outcomes in Tucson regarding housing, and equity being a big piece to that. And so knowing what Tyler has done in other communities too, I wanted to just throw that in there, that's part of where we are interested in potentially approving another scope of work, but want to make sure it's right. And so before we would issue any sort of notice to proceed, wanted to have these conversations, especially in light of the last commission meeting and questions around zoning with that.
Right. Okay. So I guess my understanding then is that you're looking for, you know, so you've been involved in specific projects, specific things. What we're talking about here is a more holistic change to, you know, the establishing an ordinance, say, for affordable housing projects that would provide certain incentives, not necessarily changing the process for rezoning or simplifying that for affordable. Maybe that could be part of it.
Yeah,
But-
I think, yeah, Jim, the process part is something that I think you're identifying, which is something that I'd want to dig into a little bit more. So if you have a commercial site and you want to do a residential project, whether that's a affordable housing project or market rate housing project, what does the timing look like? Is there a difference in terms of that timing and the fees for an affordable project versus a market rate project? Understanding some of those process and, you know, timing components of it. There is a time value of money in development, as you know, in development for both affordable housing and market rate development. Things that take longer cost more. And for affordable housing providers, that's a big deal when they're having different sort of funding components as part of their capital stack that have different timing things as well. So there's a cost part and there's a time part, but there's a cost to the time part also. And so if you think it's helpful for us to dig more into the process, we can dig into the process. And I know if you have thoughts on that about how we would want to do that, I'd love to hear it as well.
Well, I think my personal feeling is I think this is a great step. I mean, a few months ago, we talked about 3 recommendations to provide to mayor and council on what we think could have a significant impact on the amount of affordable housing in Tucson. The first was to get the housing trust fund back up and going and start putting money into that. Second was putting a bond on the ballot for affordable housing. And the third was taking a hard look at the zoning code and figuring out what we could do to the zoning code to make affordable housing projects more easier to bring out of the ground and improve the densities, all that stuff that we're talking about. So is to look at the zoning code. So I think this is agenda item 5 or no, agenda item 6 for today. But yeah, I'm all in favor of it personally.
I see 2 hands up. Shay, you want to go first? I think you're up first.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I think this is all great. One thing I feel I would love to see also somehow included in the study is I think we need housing at every level. I mean, that's what's so hard is that we need housing at every level. You know, not just affordable housing developers, right? But also there's a significant need for market rate and, you know, just housing at every level. And we have just a serious supply issue. And for me, seeing and, you know, being in practice now here locally for over 10 years, seeing how the zoning code has changed and shifted away from like very much service oriented towards small developers, mom and pop operations, small landlords, people who have historically kept rents low and reasonable and affordable. And that was considered like market, it wasn't even like a thing. It's just naturally occurring affordable housing. So, and that to me had a lot to do with the fact that development service, the counter was open. You could go in and talk to anyone at any time. You could expedite small projects. There was a lot of benefits that were given to people who lived here and were from here as developers versus people who were coming from out of state. And, you know, they're just here in real quick and then they're out just as fast. And so I'm wondering, can we use the process in some way to function the way that it used to? That again, really was about supporting our local folks and local developers and people who lived here and were from here. And we have a lot of great also local affordable housing developers here in the room and on the call who do great projects, and LIHTC is great, right? But in my when you even with LIHTC, even if we were to double those numbers, we still have a huge shortfall of units. I mean, there's just and a lot of, to me, the burden of that has to go back to the private sector. And so how do you, again, at every level, get the private sector, you know, able to participate in the process? And I think it's not just zoning, it's so much bigger than that. It's all the eligibility, it's the development standards for water, fire, you know, the whole full spectrum. And how those layers conflict. And then for me, the other big piece is just incentivizing urban infill versus sprawl. We just don't even, I feel like the development standards we have are all geared towards single family, you know, sprawling development. And we don't really have a concept or grasp of how we do urban infill well. But those would be kind of the areas I'd like to see focused on. It's, you know, trying to prioritize infill over sprawl, trying to prioritize locally led development over out-of-state development. And, you know, I don't know how or if some of the processes can do that. But to me, again, just the way that it used to function before, if you were here living in the city, you had a big leg up. Right now, the counter's closed. You have no one to talk to as a small developer. I have piles of unanswered emails. I mean, it's just development services to me. That whole, you know, that whole process has been broken since COVID, you know, and it just doesn't work online. It doesn't work virtually, in my opinion. You know, it has to go back to being in person. And so I think all those processes have to be looked at holistically.
Shay, I appreciate those comments, and I think there's a couple things that I want to sort of brainstorm about a little bit. I totally agree on the infill versus sprawl component. A lot of the work that I've been doing with Ann and with DTM on the Norte Sewer project, the Equitable TOD project, is on infill sites and thinking about mixed income, market rate, and affordable housing in some of the sites. And it's a challenge from a development standards perspective, both a physical challenge in many cases and the impact on the number of units, as well as a feasibility challenge, again, both for affordable housing and market rate development as a result of those physical barriers in code. I like your idea about thinking about opportunities to support local folks and, smaller developers. And I think there are some processes that we could think about from other best practices cities. Some of the best practices cities that I've thought about are case studies, also have like community nights, for example, on Thursday nights, where there are people that are working the counter specifically for local and small folks, or have low barrier early assistance meetings for folks too. So I think there's other process things that we can think about as we're doing the best practices too. So I'll think about that and then loop back with Ann and Corin on that piece too. Thanks. Okay, Jay.
Yeah, hey, thanks for meeting with us, Tyler. I am also on the Commission for Equitable Housing and Development, and I chair the Housing Segregation Subcommittee, and I'm the executive director of the Southwest Fair Housing Council. So really kind of try and come at these conversations with a fair housing and equity perspective. So I just, I think Shay hit so much the nail on the head in so many different ways. I just really, echo what she was saying. I think all that's great. And I also was wondering about, affordable housing, right? Which to me seems at this point to be like LIHTC housing versus, like Shay was talking about, just lack of supply in general, and needing the market to really step in and fill that void, and how those two pieces kind of play out in what you're talking about. And, Jim was talking about the housing supply committee that came to Tucson last week. And, Jim, I still thinking about, what you said, that there were like 70 something projects in the pipeline for the area, but maybe if we're lucky, a third of them will get built. And, still really wondering, like, how is that possible? I mean, of course, it's the private market, and, things aren't going to happen. I get that, but like, that's a pretty sad number. And it's, if there's that much interest, but, you think only a third is going to get built. That's bad. So, so there's that. I see, Jim, you came off mute.
Yeah, I could tell you, I mean, Tucson's in a really, really tough place right now. I'll just give you an example of something that came up this week. There's a Spring Hill Suites in Marana that was out to bid. It was, we were looking at it, Canyon Builders and Rio West were the three bidders on the project. Rio West pulled out last week. The bids were due on Monday. I told them Monday we weren't going to submit because we weren't getting bid coverage, and the numbers that were coming in were so high that I knew the project wasn't going to pencil. And when I talked to him yesterday, he said that Canyon didn't submit a bid either, and there's been no communication with them. So we put it out to 3 contractors. Nobody's submitted a bid. The numbers we got on that project, we just started at Spring Hill Suites in Avondale. Our cost on that project was $140,000 per room. The numbers we're seeing right now in Marana were $190,000 a room. The subs, so I started calling subs to ask them what's going on. And they all said they're so busy right now that they can't handle it. They bid it high because they didn't want to leave us hanging. But the reality is they don't have the people to do it. And so they're adding 20, 30, 40% to their bid. So like our plumber, there's a Spring Hill Suites going up in Tucson Marketplace. The plumber on that project bid it at $12,000 a door. They bid the Marana deal at $16,000 a door. And we're seeing that across all the trades. So the reality is our subcontractor market is stretched so thin in Tucson, we don't have the ability to build everything. There's just not the people here to do it. And it takes time to build that capability.
So, but I mean, that's an interesting point, but that to me seems very different than looking at regulatory barriers, right? I mean, and a lot of these problems, again, not being a developer, seem to be countrywide in a way that, back in 08 and 09, there were a lot of markets that were hit really badly during the foreclosure crisis, and some that really didn't get hit at all. And that seems to be really different this time. I mean, it seems to be really widespread, these problems. So, it just, these nuances I don't really understand, but I'm just wondering again, like, looking at these regulatory barriers, obviously if there's some that can come down, let's take them down. But, how much of those barriers really impacted Tucson? I mean, we lost 2 projects or we lost 200 projects. So again, just are we looking at the right thing, or making sure that we're touching on all of the things that we need to address Tucson's problems? And then, so that's one piece. And, that's just kind of me thinking as, not a developer and really not an affordable housing expert. The other piece of the puzzle for me, though, looking from the perspective of the segregation task force, we have asked for an equity study to look at, equity issues from, a 30,000 foot perspective in Tucson, but really focusing in on housing, because I don't think that we really have a clear understanding of where we are regarding equity in Tucson. I mean, clearly Tucson's very segregated, like almost every other city in this country. And, I think we're starting to at least have that in our consciousness now, but I don't think that we're really taking that into consideration. If we're looking at affordable housing and we're looking at these issues, are we looking at housing segregation and how that has played out over history, and how we are or aren't dealing with that? And if we're going to go down this road, with you, Tyler, and HCD, is there a way that we can combine this idea of an equity study with this? It just seems like, again, these things shouldn't really be operating in vacuums, right? I mean, they're kind of part and parcel to the same thing. And I think the reason we have inequitable cities in large part in segregation is because we have this conversation and we never have the conversation about segregation and access to opportunity. It's always like, oh, well, yeah, there's this crisis now. We'll deal with all of the segregation and stuff that we were supposed to be dealing with. Maybe it'll get some lip service, but we are always ending up having to kind of catch up to it and never do. So anyway, I just really hope that the equity conversation that we're trying to have can also be really linked up tightly to this potential piece of the puzzle as well.
I just had a big sigh, Jay, because that's a big important issue, and I think it is interesting. So I think there's a couple ways that we could think about that sort of segregation history of policies and sort of disparate impacts in the housing market. Frankly, we could have that be one of the ways that we're digging into the regulations and the policy changes from the best practices. So what are the ways that some of these cities have thought about the sort of racialized history of housing policy, frankly, within the sort of policy framework of making these changes? That's one way that we could look at it. The other way would be to think a little bit more spatially across Tucson and maybe even Pima County, given that, Tucson's one part, around some of these things too. But I think, I don't know, Anne, I'd like because that's a big question, I think, Jay. I think it's an important one. And in my experience, not even just from we should be doing these things sort of concurrently, but also helping to have a more full public conversation around why some of these regulatory barriers are a problem, and the history around some of these and what that looks like. So, for example, we just finished a housing disparity study for the city of Tacoma, as an intro to what we're doing right now, which is updating their essentially allowing middle housing in all their single family zones and thinking about affordable housing density bonuses across Tacoma. So part of that lead into that project was doing this housing disparity study, doing some capacity building with the community organizations to help have those conversations within their communities. And then bringing that into that sort of regulatory conversation. So I don't know, it's something I'd like to follow up with Ann and Corin on to see how we can get that to fit and the right way to get that to fit. But I appreciate those are really good comments.
I just want to throw in there, and I saw you probably going to jump in, but you know, the transit corridor that we're talking about, Norte Sur, like I'm like that is just such an example of where if we're not out ahead of that, you know, it's just going to lead to more gentrification and displacement, and that is something that this commission is charged with doing and dealing with, and you know, hopefully we're getting there. I don't think we're really attacking that, and the divide between Tucson and Pima County, to me, is something that's really unique and really problematic in this community, because Tucson is in the middle, right? It's got most of the population, it's got most of the segregation, and the white flight has gone to the, you know, suburban jurisdictions that really aren't, I don't know, in my opinion, I think that they just think of them as separate and look down on Tucson for all of the problems that it has, but it's again related to the development that's occurred in those communities, and I don't think they really care about it, and I don't think we really talk about it holistically. And again, if we're not talking about it holistically, I don't think we can address those issues. So anyway, I said my piece. Thanks.
So one, and I do want to hear, I see Megan's hand up. Just one thing I'll want to think through with you, Tyler, Corin, and sort of talk back, you know, circle back to this group on, is trying to balance, like, I don't want to call this a study and take forever to then come up with, like, balancing having some immediate actions to potentially move forward with action, with pieces that will take longer to think through and study. And so, you know, part of my goal here is to be able to help you all with potentially making recommendations to mayor and council on potential code amendments or things that can be implemented sooner. And so we'll want to try to think through not having a long study for the sake of studying versus wanting to make sure what the things that may be more ready to move forward can move forward, and move forward with intention and thinking through community concerns. So those are just some of my thought processes there, but I see Megan has her hand up too.
Yeah, and I just wanted to I'm sorry, I just wanted to check in about time real quick too. Can I think Megan will have you speak, and then we'll probably have to move on to the next agenda item.
Megan, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're having some connection problems. We're having a hard time hearing you, I think.
And I'm not even sure it's Megan because it looks like she's on mute.
Wow.
I'm gonna ask her to unmute. Sorry, Megan, it is you, even though it shows you as muted. Okay, we lost her.
Okay. Well, I think we should go ahead and move on to the next agenda item. This sounds great, and yeah, I'm excited. I also think it's going to be really important to have at the end of it just clear recommendations. I think that's what we've been struggling with. The topic is so broad, and just having that focus, like you're saying, Tyler, I think that's the challenge for sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Shay, and thank you to everybody on the committee for the time. I'll follow up with Ann and Corin, and then let them figure out how we're taking it next steps and communicating things with you. But thank you all for the time. Appreciate the
Thank you,
conversation.
Tyler.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, let's move on. Sorry to rush things through, but we've only got now like maybe what time did Jim say he had to leave? 5:50.
Lots of cumin and chili powder. Oh, you're supposed to do it in the big stock pot.
Have they play a factor?
I'm still here.
Okay, Jim, when do you have to take off? 5 what was it?
Yeah, like 5:15, 5:20.
Yikes, okay. In that case, I'm not sure how, I think we need to formalize definitely the subcommittee members before you take off, Jim, and then I'm not sure, we're gonna probably have to end the meeting, right? I mean, I don't see any other way around it.
Well, let's keep it going as long as we can.
Okay, all right, let's move to number 4, formalization of subcommittee members. I have,
So, and I can share my screen based on the piece here. Just if there's any, sounds like Olga is likely resigning from the commission. And so we would remove her name here. But want to make sure that everything else looks right to people. And if this is sort of what makes sense to you all, then just make that motion to bring to the, have this be the makeup of the subcommittee. So I think it could be fairly short if people agree this is what, if we heard you all correctly.
I actually think that not having Olga will help us a little bit with quorum, right? At that point, would we have quorum if we just have 2 members? No?
No, if you still would need 3, because if Olga's not there, you have 4 members and you need more than 50%.
More than a majority, darn it. So then is there someone ex officio who we could bring on?
It's got to be somebody from the main commission that's a voting member, sadly.
Well, we can just, I think we should handle that.
So Mary Ann Bierling is a full voting member now. She's part of the committee, right?
And so, I think
And then
that,
Maggie.
and yeah, so that would be the 4, Jim. And so I think one thing you can try to do is if Olga's replacement, whoever's going to replace Olga, assuming she really is resigning, then trying to recruit somebody else, like other folks from the full commission, could be one strategy.
Yeah, I was gonna say, can we add that on the agenda for the full commission next time, is to ask anyone, somebody to volunteer for our committee?
Well, I think we had 2 ex officio members who were not on a subcommittee. Isn't that right, Ann?
You're saying 2 voting members?
Yeah, Ken Brianna and gosh darn it, from the Housing Coalition. I'm having a brain fart here.
Joanna.
Yeah, Joanna. But Joanna's, I just found out, is going to be moving to Flagstaff, probably in the next 2 to 3 months. So she's not going to be with us for very long, unfortunately.
So recruit,
yeah, all right.
recruit folks who will want to do this. And sorry, I have to take a call quick. So Neto, take over for HCD side, please.
Will do.
Hello.
Okay, so we need to make a motion to make Maggie and Mary Ann Bierling a full voting member, and then remove Olga. Is that the motion that has to be made?
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Yes, I think so. Okay, I'll make that motion.
Do you need a second?
So
Has to be
I think
Shay.
Shay, you're the only. Yeah, Shay, you need to second that.
Okay, yes, I second, so the motion carries, is approved.
Okay,
it's just
so
Now I have a voice.
The what?
Now I have a voice.
Right.
Right? Now with.
yeah, so I vote in favor.
Do we need to take it to a vote?
Well,
Well,
I think we're supposed to. Yeah, so
Yes.
I vote in
All right.
favor of the motion.
Okay, so so we'll take a vote to instate Mary Ann Bierling and Maggie Amato Tejas as voting members. All those in favor, aye.
I,
Aye.
Okay, motion
can I
passed.
vote on that?
Shay, just to clarify, that motion should have included dropping Olga from.
Oh, yes. And we forgot to include in the motion to remove Olga Flores from our voting members. So all those in favor of dropping Olga Flores?
I'm not in favor, but I'll vote aye.
Aye.
I know, all right, motion passes. I honestly though too, I think technically she's already missed several meetings in a row. I think she's already technically kind of would have been on the chopping block for, make or break time to decide whether or not she's on the commission. I haven't seen her in, it's been several meetings now. But then hearing that from you, Maggie, just confirms.
Yeah.
So, okay, so I think that handles that item. Can we move on to number 5, first-time home buyer and affordable housing? Maggie and Betty. Maggie, do you want to pass since Betty's not here?
Well, we can, but I think what we wanted to do, the only thing, I don't know if we want more, is basically adding kind of some kind of a task force, or it's just kind of layering of subcommittees is crazy, but a subcommittee of the subcommittee, we kind of had discussed it last time about how do we start discussing home ownership as, affordable home ownership is part of this meeting. How do we, what does that look like? Do we just add it as an agenda item, bring it up for discussion, or do we have some kind of a committee that discusses it and then brings it to the subcommittee? I'm not sure how that works. So that was kind of it in a nutshell.
I actually see Betty joining the call. So
Oh,
Yeah.
yay. Yeah.
She's coming on.
that actually might help our whole session. We might now have quorum. So actually, this is perfect.
So, last time when we talked about this, I had asked about bringing Steve Hastings on because he's got a project he's doing down here. It's an affordable for sale to, talk about how he's doing it and to maybe give some recommendations on things that we can do as a commission to incentivize that. I'm happy to I think he's out of town right now with his grandkids, but I can get that set up for our next meeting if you'd like.
I think that would be great. He's doing affordable home ownership.
Yeah, he has actually it's 2 separate sites here in Tucson. I think it's like 25 units total that he's putting the deal together right now.
That's cool.
So I was thinking that we could ask him to join us for our next subcommittee meeting to talk about how he structured the deal and provide some recommendations to us.
That would be great. I really like that idea. Oh, go ahead, Betty.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I
Yes.
wasn't sure. I'm at a,
You just put yourself on mute.
okay. I put my earpods on. I wasn't sure if I needed to unmute it with that. Yeah, so I'm sorry, guys. I'm at a conference in San Diego, so I apologize. But yeah, I think that would be a really good idea, Steve, to bring Steve on. I'd really like to hear his perspective and how he's moving forward with the Westmoreland project. And maybe we can get some good feedback and ideas from him. I don't know how much Maggie, I think Maggie talked about how we, the whole purpose of us being on the agenda is because we wanted to make sure that home ownership didn't take a backseat to the housing issues affecting our community. So, and we know that there's people that are more interested in the rental side of housing. And then there's those that are interested more in the home ownership. So, and some are interested in both and would want to participate in both. But we are hoping that we can do a subcommittee, I guess, if you will, with focusing, on solutions for home ownership, and planning for the future of what's to come, and being prepared for what's to come down the pike from the feds for home ownership, from locally. We've been hearing a lot about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac bringing out new products, HUD bringing out new innovations for home ownership, more incentives, more down payment. So we want to make sure that, that we're prepared, that, whatever is coming down, that we're aware of what it is and how can we best, implement some of these programs that we're hearing about. So that's really, I think, what I wanted to talk about today. And I think we made our case on why homeownership matters already. So it's just a matter of finding those solutions. And I know that, Jim, we're kind of rushed to make recommendations, but it's a little difficult because this is coming out late in this committee. We haven't really talked about homeownership a lot, so we're kind of behind the 8 ball on it. So I think we will need some more time to really find some consensus in the recommendations.
I'm wondering though, Betty, if we need a separate subcommittee or if we can just give you all space in this meeting, every meeting. Like, could we just give you all like a dedicated, 15, 20 minutes every meeting to go into those issues?
15 or 20 minutes out of how many minutes? It's got to be equitable.
Well, we have an hour and a half, so.
So is it equitable
Actually,
for
if
us
you-
to
if you
get
guys-
15 to 20 minutes?
Well,
But if
considering
you
we
guys
have
recall, I think with the last
agenda
commission meeting, we talked about extending this to 2 hours going
Yeah.
forward. So I think for our next meeting, I would like to see it, maybe from 4 to 6, and let's plan on extending these meetings from an hour and a half to 2 hours. And so we can get enough time for all these items, because we are rushing through things, and I agree, it's going to take time to get to consensus on what the recommendations are. But my preference would be to keep it in this subcommittee.
Okay, that'll be fine. Whatever the group wants.
Yeah, I thought we had talked about last time having a dedicated segment for this topic as well as the zoning topic, because that's another huge, broad.
Yeah. And that really zoning it incorporates both, right? I mean,
Yeah. Mhm.
So yeah.
But I think we would only have, out of 2 hours, if each of those big topics got 20 to 30 minutes, that's already half the meeting. So, and then we have all the other items, we have to get through it in every meeting. So
But are we talking about just the affordable housing subcommittee or the full committee?
just our committee. We're talking about extending the meeting to 2 hours, having some dedicated segments for potentially what you're discussing, the affordable home ownership and zoning. And then we generally have a bunch of other items, updates and things that end up on the agenda also. Like right now we have 10 items on the agenda. So again, even if we dedicated 20 to, I think the max each of those topics could take is 30. Well, realistically, they probably have to each
Yeah,
get
well,
20,
30 is definitely better than 15 or 20. So yeah. If we could do 30 minutes rental, 30 minutes homeownership, 30 minutes zoning, and then 30 minutes other items. Some of them are going to overlap, right?
Yeah, I don't think that the rental, no one has really, Yeah, I guess I don't know. I don't know what the rental needs. It's no one has asked for their own segment for rentals. I mean, I'm not sure that that needs a dedicated segment. I think
Yeah,
that
let's give that a try and see how it goes. I think that's a good suggestion. That's my view. That's my perspective.
okay. So you think you like the format? Can we keep it to 25? I think we could just try to be more organized about the time and do 20, because I'm just thinking 25, 50, 45 minutes. I guess we don't need an hour. Let me think about this. So 30, that would leave us half an hour for other items. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Yeah. So you want a segment just on rentals, Jim? Is that?
Well, rental is rent. Sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a major component of affordable housing is the rental market. I agree that the for sale is a portion, but 90 to 95% of the affordable housing units developed are rentals. That's the reality. And so I think we need to give that some attention.
Okay, well, I like that moving forward. I think it's like it'll give some time for Betty and Maggie too to present and you know, catch it, you know, like you're saying, Betty, catch us all up on the issues and solutions and strategies, and then give us enough time to make the recommendations. Okay, well, that all sounds good to me. Can we then move on to the next agenda item, which was, I wanted Jim, before you have to leave, to have a little bit of time to get to the affordable housing unit goals and the recommendations on the action items.
Sure. So basically, this is going back to some discussions that we had. I think it was 3 months ago where this subcommittee came out. We brainstormed on all of the different things that we thought that the city and the county could do to incentivize affordable housing. And we boiled it down to 3 main issues. One was to adjust the zoning code to make it simpler to develop affordable housing. The second was to get a bond on the ballot. I think we talked about a 0.1% sales tax dedicated to the development of affordable housing. And the third was to reestablish the Housing Trust Fund so that the city could contribute more to fill gaps on affordable housing. And we kicked that up to the overall commission. There was a number of questions that came back from the commission on how we're going to do this. And we've never really come back to the subcommittee to answer those questions. And I don't know that we need to. I think that as a commission, you know, after talking about it with HCD and talking about it with different people, I think we don't have to necessarily identify the sources of all the funds and even identify all the uses or go through the specifics of how these things are going to be done. I think it's our job as a commission to make the recommendations to the city, allow mayor and council to weigh in on it and decide if that's something that they want to invest city resources on, and then staff can give input on the best way to move forward and to make it happen. So I guess what I'm hoping that we can do today is go back to those 3 recommendations, and if we still feel that those are the best things to do, then kick it back up to the overall commission, and I'm hoping that we can get it approved by the commission and make those recommendations. You know, one of the things that was said during the zoning discussion was, you know, a lot of cities have declared a housing emergency, and I don't know if we want to go so far as to declare a housing emergency, but I kind of feel like we're on the hairy edge of that right now, with everything that's happening. So, and maybe that's what needs to happen to get these things pushed through. So Shay, I need you to lead this conversation because I can't see who wants to speak.
Yeah, I see Anne. Anne, go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple. One is I put in the chat what Jim just summarized in terms of the subcommittee goals identified way back when. One clarification, Jim, it's identify new funding opportunities for affordable housing. So there was nothing specific about a bond and or tax. So just clarity there. But then I'm also putting in your recommendations on, I wasn't there, but for the meeting that Sarah helped walk through the sort of more specific recommendations, because those were a little bit more specific. One thing I will say, Jim, in terms of those three goals, the last one was, deliver a sufficient number of new affordable housing units. I do think at some point, not today, down the road, I would love this subcommittee's help in setting targets. I think that is something that we really need to know in terms of the city. What are we striving for in the community? And I think this subcommittee, with having developers and both smaller scale and larger scale developers, can really help us with that. So, and I'm putting more in the chat.
I guess, Jim, I feel like we're still working on these items. I feel like that's why we haven't had any recommendations yet, because we haven't been able to kind of narrow it in to just a few quick, tangible policy items.
So,
I mean, I feel like that's what we're going to be doing with
what would you,
West and
yeah. So what do you think we need to do differently, Shay? I guess I want to make sure that we don't spend so much time analyzing it that we can't never make recommendations. What do you think we need to drill down on or try to get more consensus on?
honestly, for me, the zoning one's going to take a lot of time. If we could focus on the funding maybe in a shorter term, I mean, because that's what I keep going back to too. Even if we fix the zoning, which is going to take time, right? We still don't have the money.
Well, I don't think the recommendation is change X, Y, Z in the zoning. I think the recommendation is let's do a study or, this workshop that we were talking about earlier this morning to analyze the zoning code and have that activity come out with the outcomes. I don't know that we need to necessarily identify all the outcomes, but we need to push the city to get that study or get that workshop going. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the motion might be, and would we need a motion to direct Eco Northwest to basically do what we've already asked them to?
I think just you could offer support, like recommendation that HCD work with Eco Northwest. Could be, offer support there. I think, remember, you would make recommendations to mayor and council. So, yeah, I think you can voice support for that sort of work.
I see. Jay, go ahead.
Hey, I was just gonna throw out there, I kind of feel this way in the housing segregation subcommittee and just what we're doing in general. I mean, this stuff is these things are such heavy lifts. It's like, I just feel like we as subcommittees and the commission in general need to be staying at 30,000 feet and directing other people what to do. I mean, there's just no way. I mean, we're talking about like 30 minutes to talk about home ownership one time a month per subcommittee. You know, it's just like, there's just no time. So I just wanted to throw that out there as like, you know, as the commission, we really need to kind of stay high and I think tell people basically what to do or give recommendations. So just wanted to throw that out there because it's so easy to get bogged down and not accomplish a lot. So.
So, how about this? I mean, the recommendation for the zoning could be to analyze the zoning code, improvements to the zoning code to incentivize more affordable housing to be developed in Tucson, which would include potential density bonuses, setback changes, building height changes. We've already got the parking, as well as streamlining the rezoning process on affordable housing projects. Something along those lines could be the recommendation, and then not necessarily saying how it's going to happen, but if mayor and council says they want to see this happen, you know, then everybody's going to figure out how to make it happen. Are you comfortable with something like that, Shay?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. I feel like those things are already in motion though. I guess that's where I'm confused as to why we need a separate.
Are they?
So can I ask Anne, so you put some stuff in the chat. So what are those?
Just what you all had taught. I wasn't actually at this meeting, but my understanding is that was the results of an affordable housing subcommittee meeting in terms of recommendations to mayor and council. I wasn't, you know, that was the end slide in that presentation that was set out earlier. So
Jim
that's all that
probably,
was.
so Jim can't see this, but you said provide a set of recommendations to blah, 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 identify new funding. So there's a 1, 2, 3 point, and then a 2, 3, 4, 5 points, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I guess I'm a little.
I think the clarification here though is, has mayor and council really directed anybody to start looking at this? Have they said, we want staff to analyze this and look at this? I know that there's some things that are happening, but I don't know that there's actually been a formal guidance by mayor and council, has there?
I see Corin's hand is up. Do you have the answer?
Yeah.
To that, Corin?
Yeah, I can weigh in if you guys can hear me. Yeah, you're correct, Jim. There's been no formal guidance from mayor and council. So to clarify, what we can do and often do as staff is do research, do some of the technical analysis, lay the groundwork for code changes. So what we were talking with Tyler about before was just starting to look into best practices, looking into what some of the barriers and issues are in our code. But for something to really move forward, mayor and council need to formally initiate any changes to our unified development code. So they're really the ones who start that process. And then once we get direction from mayor and council to start the code amendment process, that would then, you know, kick off a whole public engagement outreach process where there'd be lots of opportunity for input, further analysis, you know, develop a proposal, and then it goes to planning commission and mayor and council for adoption.
So then, I guess, Corin, is that what you need from us then, is to get this on the agenda at mayor and council? Is
Right. So yeah, so I think just to say it is helpful if this is something that committee thinks is a priority. I think it is very helpful to have it in your recommendations to mayor and council, that they direct staff to initiate a code amendment that would address, you know, these issues: affordable housing, ways to incentivize affordable housing, even ways to incentivize other housing, should you want to include that as well, you know, missing middle housing or small scale infill or whatever you guys want this to include.
Okay, because with that, then I also feel like, you know, we also need to have direction about these funding streams. I mean, I can't remember where we were at in the process too with getting the housing trust fund reinstated. I see that here as a short-term goal in this PowerPoint that Sarah had put together. Yeah, I feel like we were there the last time that we had brought up these items to the full commission. They got kicked back to our subcommittee because we needed to study these items more, and then that goes back to where Eco Northwest got involved, because then we're like, well, we can have the consultant team help us kind of try to narrow down some of these items into specific action related policy items. So I don't know that, Jim, we're ready to present anything yet to Mayor and Council, because we already tried that a few months ago. Do you remember?
Okay,
I mean, that's my general sense, is that we still have.
I kind of agree with what Jay said, that we don't necessarily need to say how everything happens. We just need to give them recommendations on how we think Mayor and Council should, where they should be focusing going forward, and try to keep it higher level, but not necessarily have all the, you know, the city has a surplus right now, right? I heard there's $120 million surplus in the budget. If they want to put money into the housing trust fund, they've got the ability to do it, and we don't necessarily need to tell them how to do that. That makes sense?
You don't think? I think that would be a really helpful and specific item to direction to give, actually, if that's the case. Yeah.
Well, you know, if you're not comfortable moving forward, let's the two of us get together offline. We'll spend another month kind of trying to work through the exact language and how we want to present it, and we could bring it back to this group next month and try again. I'm fine with that if that's what you want to do.
Yeah, I'm not. It's so broad. I'm just having a trouble like condensing it all into like two items, because I felt like we tried to do that and it got kicked back to us. People were like, well, what zoning items do you specifically want to look at? And that's where we've been at. And so I think that the funding sources maybe could be more, and to me, whatever recommendation needs to address those two main buckets, which was one was zoning and the other was potential sources of funding for affordable housing. So it'd be nice if we could get those two items wrapped up into some very concise recommendation. But I mean, do you have an idea of how to word this motion, Jim? I mean, if you have something already you think that will work.
I've not typed it up, but I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Where did the general obligation bond recommendation come in? Because I don't see it in the notes here, but I do remember hearing about it.
Yeah, so I have the PowerPoint also up. Sarah had sent it before she had sent it along with the materials for this meeting, and those were the top two. So for funding category results, the top two were the general obligation bond and the housing trust fund to be reinstated. But the general obligation bond to me is a longer term item because we need county support. Like Jay was saying, it's all the need is in the city, but all the money is in the county. So we're just like at this horrible political moment where the last bond failed in the county you know, because they don't see the need to fund the inner city Tucson. I mean,
Well, I think, and then also because they end up layering a bunch of crap on it that people balk, it becomes huge, it becomes this big old request.
Yeah.
So
I think if I could interject here with the bond, I think what we need to make sure is that when there, because it takes more than housing bonds to really get a general bond out there. You know, typically you're going to have a lot more items, needed items on a general obligation bond, at least from the county side of it. And I'm sure from, you know, from the city as well. You know, it does include different things, and there's a question for every single bond item. And so it has to be very specific to what the need is. So I would say for the bond that our recommendation should be that we should have an affordable housing, or a bond for affordable housing in every bond issue moving forward. So, you know, just the way we did at the county with the neighborhood reinvestment.
but I think then you
And
put it in a position where people can vote it down. I actually thought that what would be great would be to do a separate affordable housing bond, just focused on affordable housing, similar to the parks bond that just got passed, where people understand it. It's not mixed in with all these other issues, and it's just its own, it's its own very focused bond. I mean,
well, I think before we do that, we need to understand how general obligation bonds work and the money it takes to put it together, and because you need bond attorneys to even put a bond package together. And so, I mean, we can do that. We can recommend that as soon as it's feasible for the bond market, that we put a general obligation bond out there to the voters. And then, you know, just on its own. But, you know, if there's other bonds that go out, you know, it's almost like we could lose an opportunity if we don't say, you know, let's be included in every bond that goes out. And maybe that's just for, you know, the city has different bonding capacity than the county. So, and maybe one bond for housing would work in the city. I'm not familiar. And maybe that's something that staff could look into for us with their bond attorney. But I know for the county, it's bigger. It's always going to be multiple items. But also the county bond, when they do the neighborhood reinvestment and the bonds for affordable housing, it includes the city. But when the city does it, it doesn't include the county. So, you know, we should be making sure that both of them, that they're included in both. So I know, why don't we just ask staff to look into what it takes to put, you know, what it would take to make that recommendation. What, you know, is it feasible or is it not feasible? And then we can just go on to the housing trust fund.
So, hey guys, I apologize. I do need to drop off. I will type some stuff up for our next meeting, and Maggie, if you can help me with some of the bond stuff, because that's completely out of my wheelhouse. Let's try to get something more concrete for their next meeting, and try to get some recommendations to mayor and council. I think it's important that we do that here at some point.
Yeah, I agree. I'm totally with you, Jim. I just think we need time to flesh these things out, because to me right now, the recommendations aren't clear. I just, I feel you.
Okay.
I would love to have something ready to
Well,
go.
So I'll type something out. I'll send it out to you guys. We'll try to talk about it before our next meeting, and so we can have some sort of hopefully consensus going into our next meeting.
All right.
All right, thank
And
you.
then,
Okay.
and I'm free to meet with you and Shay, and maybe Betty is also, to kind of start discussing how to flesh this out for the next. Do we present it first to subcommittee to then present it to the full commission? So
Yeah,
Correct.
yeah, so we can, I'd be happy to talk about that. Betty's just make sure that, Betty is the bond guru.
Just remember not to have a quorum if you all are meeting talking.
so
Sorry.
we need less
I need to
than,
bring that up.
I'm not a voting, do I count in the quorum if I'm not a voting?
You don't,
member?
Betty, but
Okay,
So three voting members and Betty? Would that be, is that a quorum? I don't know. Are we talking about subcommittee quorum?
yep, subcommittee quorum.
I think we need to have Sarah present as well. I feel like I'm losing, I feel like we're losing focus, and I feel like she had us kind of on track a little bit. So, I mean, in terms of, we need someone on the city side to help us understand who the right people are to ask and who to bring into the meetings and who we need to be directing.
I'm happy, depending on when it is, hopefully Sarah will be available. I think she's the
Okay.
right person. If not, we'll make sure to have somebody.
Okay. All right, well then I think what would be great is for us to have a smaller discussion on that, and then have some clearer,
But not a quorum.
not a quorum, but a smaller, more organized, focused discussion on this, so we have
I mean,
something hopefully to recommend.
A potential solution there is if you want at least 3 of you to meet, would be to just notice a public meeting and invite others between now and next month.
Okay. So you need 2 weeks notification for that, right?
No, you just need, they want 48 hours.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. That's not bad. Okay, well, yeah, we'll get on an email and figure it all out and gets there and back in looped in. So, all right, well, thank you, everyone. I think we should end because Jim has to go, and
Okay.
we're pretty much done with the agenda. There was just some HCD updates.
I think it's okay to punt that.
Okay, let's just end the meeting then. And thank you all. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.